We're sitting in the American Heritage Room of Morris Library on the campus of Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois. We're here to interview Susan Tulis, who is Associate Dean for Information Services of Morris Library. Prior to coming to Carbondale, Susan was Government Documents Librarian at the University of Virginia Law Library from 1982 to 1997. Susan, I believe those watching or reading this interview would like to know a little bit about you personally. For example, could you begin by telling us where you were raised and about your family, both when you were young and today? Then perhaps you could tell us about your education, including where you went to college and then to library school.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that, and thanks for asking. I actually was born in a very small town called Willington, Connecticut, a town of about 2,000, and I think it's probably still only 2,000, in the northeast corner of Connecticut. I grew up on a farm. I'm the middle child of three. I have two brothers, one older, one younger. My brothers still actually live pretty much in the same area. I'm the only one who is adventurous enough to move away. My parents owned a small grocery store and gas station, which they purchased when I was about 10. And I probably spent from age 10 till I went away to college working in the grocery store and gas station. As many people know, I was pumping gas at age 10, which used to freak out some of the customers. They couldn't believe that when this tiny little thing, because I was short, came out and said, "May I help you?" They'd say, "I think I'll wait for your parents." I said, No, I can do it. It's fine." And then when I asked if they wanted their oil checked, most of them said no. So I am the first person in my family who went to college. Neither of my parents went. In fact, my father never graduated from 8th grade. He was born in the United States, but he didn't learn English until he was to go away to school. And so he started first grade at an older age than most first graders, and when he turned 16, they pulled him out of school so that he could work the farm. So not a lot of support, my parents supported me going to college, but they were certainly not pushing me to go to college. I just lucked out that in high school, the crowd that I hung with was going to college. So I ended up going to the University of Connecticut, which is 9 miles from where I grew up, and it was, the only place I applied to go to school. I wasn't sure how I was going to finance it. I figured I'd apply. If there wasn't enough money to go, I'd defer it for a year. But I ended up, luckily at that time, going to college was very cheap. It was $50 a semester, and I managed to scrape together the money to go. So.
And where did you go to library school? How did you make that decision?
I did go to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And at that point, I took a year off between undergraduate and graduate school, and I concluded that if I didn't move away for graduate school, I would never leave the area that I grew up in. I think my parents would have preferred that I go to Simmons in Boston, since Boston was an hour and 15 minutes away, but I clearly was finding myself and decided that I needed to move someplace.
How did you happen to choose library school as opposed to some other program?
That is a good question. When I went to college, I thought I wanted to be a math teacher, till I had to deal with the third semester of calculus, at which point I switched to accounting, almost flunked intro to accounting, had to take a course over the summer, so I took a psychology class. Like psychology, ended up doing psychology with a minor in statistics. If the University of Connecticut had a statistics degree, I probably would have ended up majoring in that, but they didn't. You had to get a math degree with a minor in statistics. But my sophomore year in college, I got a job on campus, work-study job, and it happened to be in the library. I worked in the reserve book room. My bosses were all, to me, I thought they were old. They were probably, in their early 20s. They were all going to library school, and so over the course of working with them and talking to them, I decided that this was something that I thought I could do. And I think my working in my parents' store, where I got used to waiting on people and finding stuff for people, is what sort of led me to to library school, and knowing that I was going to end up doing public services. There was no way I was going to be tech services.
Very good. Your current position is in the Maine University Library here at Southern Illinois University, but you are a former law librarian. Could you tell us a little bit about how you moved into the profession of law librarianship?
By accident. I was the assistant government documents librarian at the University of Virginia in the Maine Library when I got out of library school. I did that for 4 years. There was a government documents librarian at the law library at UVA who I had a lot of interaction with through government documents. And she left to take a job in DC, and she pretty much was the one who said, "You need to apply for this job." I was terrified of applying for that job because I didn't have a law degree, and I thought there's no way I can do this. And she convinced me otherwise. She actually did not have a law degree either. So she said, apply. I applied, interviewed, got offered the job. The thing she kept reminding me of was, you're a government documents librarian first, a law reference librarian second. And over the course of time, I figured out that for the most part, I could answer about 95% of the questions without a law degree. And for those 5% that I couldn't answer, there were other reference librarians on staff who I could refer the question to. And as you might imagine, law library is a little bit smaller than a main library, and so the staff is all, we're one big happy family and work together, and you don't have a lot of hierarchy to go through.
You were the government documents librarian at UVA for about 16 years. Are there any experiences or personalities that stand out in your memory about those years?
People working there?
People working there, or patrons, or any experiences that you might have had?
Definitely the staff at UVA. I'm sure many people know Ken Dolson, who was hired while I was there. Ken's a character. There's no doubt about that, and hopefully Kent will also be interviewed, so payback is hell. If he hears me say this, he's brilliant. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But he is also a character, and he made it fun to go to work. He made it frustrating some days as well. When I got hired, Larry Wanger was the director there. Been there for a long time. Was a good person to work for. A lot of the people at UVA are still there. Joe Wynn, Michael Klepper. I know the rest are probably new people from when I worked there. Patrons, what I found interesting about working in the law library is that it did get so that you could tell what week of the semester it was by the questions the students were asking. If they're asking about federal regulations, okay, it must be the 10th week of the first semester or something along those lines. What I found interesting, like I said, I was worried about not being able to answer law school students' questions because I didn't have a law degree. I actually found when I went to the law library that it was harder to answer non-law school student questions because they would come in and assume there's one book that will answer their question. And when you explain to them that, no, this is case law, these are regulations, you'd also have to look at secondary sources, they would get very frustrated because their assumption was, well, okay, I can ask my one question and, I'll go to one book and find the answer. And knowing that they were going to have to do a little bit more work, they found it incredibly frustrating. And on the flip side, we did have a few law school students who were less than pleasant to work with, and those were probably the ones that I had always encountered at the main library. I think the law librarians had gotten so frustrated with them, told them, I don't know if they told them to go to the main library, but they ended up in the main library. So my impression of law school students before I went to the law library was not very good, but once I got to the law library, I concluded that law school students were pretty cool.
Very good.
Actually, let me think. There's one other thing I was going to tell you. When I went to library school, I actually trained to be a medical librarian. I was certified as a medical librarian. That's what I thought I wanted to do. Until I did an internship at the EPA while I was in library school, and part of my internship was working in the medical library at UNC. And the medical students and the few doctors and nurses that I encountered at the med school were so awful that I decided there was no way I was going to continue as a medical librarian.
Well, the law library profession is better for that decision.
I hope so.
Let's turn our attention to your experience as the American Association of Law Libraries Assistant Washington Affairs Representative, which you did, I believe, in the early 1990s. And at that time, you worked directly with AALL's longtime Washington Affairs Representative, Robert Oakley. Bob was the professor of law and director of the law library at Georgetown for many years, of course, including those when he served at AALL. Could you tell us a little bit about that experience, some of the kinds of things that you did as the Assistant Washington Affairs Representative, and then maybe tell us a little bit about your experiences with Bob Oakley?
Okay. I feel incredibly lucky to have been the first Assistant Washington Affairs Representative. Because of my involvement in government documents and proximity to Washington, D.C., I was able to go to D.C. a lot. At that time, for congressional hearings, for library association representative meetings. My activities in the Government Documents Roundtable of the American Library Association enabled me to attend such sessions in Washington, D.C. So I actually knew Bob prior to becoming the Assistant Washington Affairs Rep, because he was the AALL person. Oftentimes I'd be there with ALA reps or the Association of Research Library reps, because UVA is an ARL library as well. So when that position came open, I mean, it was like doing everything that I was sort of already doing but not being paid for. I was doing it on a voluntary basis. So I did apply for it. I wasn't sure if I wanted to do it. Well, the first year was a trial basis to see if the association really needed an assistant in Washington, D.C., and whether they would be able to fund it. So I actually got a year's leave of absence from my job at UVA to do this position, because I didn't want to take it and then in a year not have a job anywhere. I was very lucky that UVA was willing to do that. In fact, they extended the leave so that it was more like a year and 3/4, so that I could continue working in DC through the end of a Congress, because Congress runs 2 years. The beauty of working with Bob is that, Bob is so incredibly bright, has had so much confidence in me, probably more confidence in me than I had in myself. And I think we were a natural fit together. A lot of what I did was initially was attending meetings with Bob all over the Hill. At that time, there were lots of interest groups in Washington dealing with access to government information, copyright, funding for Library of Congress, Government Printing Office, even National Library of Medicine, the National Agricultural Library, anything library related or, access to information were our big issues. It was an exciting time to be in DC. I met people that I never would have met, which was just wonderful. But as a result of having already been working on the Hill, I had some contacts that Bob didn't have, and vice versa. So we were able to work together as a team. But obviously Bob was still the director of the law library, so a lot of what I did was the prep work. I wrote, drafts of testimony for Bob or the other library associations at that time. Oftentimes we would do joint statements with ALA and ARL and AALL. We did white papers on topics. A lot of it is just on the phone trying to get into a congressman's office. I mean, you do a lot of schmoozing with their staffers in order to, get your concerns known. It wasn't schmoozing in a bad way, it was schmoozing in a good way. How's that?
That was hard work for you?
Yeah, it was hard work, very hard work. Some would beg to differ.
Since unfortunately we won't have an opportunity to interview Bob for this oral history project, I wonder if you could shed a little bit of light on how he managed to really balance both the positions, as you say, as director of the law library, as well as serving what, at least from the outside, appeared to be a full-time job as AALL Washington Affairs representative.
I think some of it is Bob's personality. I don't think he had to spend a lot of time convincing people that he knew what he was talking about. He was so calm and collected. I mean, he never raised his voice. If he disagreed with you, you probably wouldn't know it, or you wouldn't know it in a bad way. I mean, he could disagree with you, but still have a reasoned conversation with you. So, whereas someone else who might come in and be very demanding in what they wanted you to do, it might take that person a little bit longer to get their point across or convince someone that you really do know what you're talking about. So I think Bob had the ability to just go in and have a reasonable, rational conversation with someone that might take a lot less time than someone else. And, I'm sure there may be someone on his staff who felt he spent too much time doing AALL work, but, the association is such a better association because of his work.
Well, of course, he eventually served as AALL president and then received the Marion Gallagher Distinguished Service Award, so I think the association certainly has recognized his importance to the profession and to the association itself. Perhaps we can take a step backwards. So you left your position as the assistant AALL Washington Affairs representative, returned to the University of Virginia's law library as government information librarian. Tell us a little bit, you mentioned being on the Depository Library Council and very active in ALA's Documents Roundtable. I wonder if you could first tell us a little bit about your experiences with the Depository Library Council and the Roundtable, and you might mention positions that you held in those entities.
I started at UVA in 1978 as the assistant documents librarian. I was very lucky that I had a phenomenal mentor, Sandy Peterson, who was the GovDocs librarian at the College of William and Mary. I think without her mentoring me, I'm not certain I would have gotten as involved. I wouldn't have gotten as involved as quickly as I did, because she called me, I'd been on the job 2 months, she called me up and said, you know, hi, I'm Sandy Peterson, glad you're here. Oh, by the way, are you going to Depository Library Council in the fall? And I'm like, I have no idea what that is. And she convinced me that I should go. Not only did I go, I think I probably roomed with her, and within a very short period of time, I was asked to serve on the Depository Library Council, which is a 15-member advisory board to the Public Printer of the United States. It is an appointed position. 5 people are appointed each year for a 3-year term. And it's basically that. It's an advisory board to the public printer, which, if you think about it, is pretty amazing. I mean, the public printer is appointed by the president. You know, I think at the time, my first go around on it, I'm not certain I even appreciated can't think of the right word, how important that advisory group was. It also varied from public printer to public printer as to how much involvement you had with the public printer versus his staff. But I really feel like we made an impact on a lot of changes in the government printing office as a way to improve access to government information. So at the same time that I was dealing with Depository Library Council, I also was active in ALA. I never chaired the government documents round, or did I? I can't even remember. Yeah, I did chair the government documents round table. Sorry. I never chaired the Depository Library Council. I was secretary a number of times for...
How many times did you serve on the Depository Library Council?
I actually have served 3 times.
Is that a record?
It is a record as of right now. I don't know if it's been broken. I think I was the first person to serve a 2nd term that record has been broken, but it's pretty exciting.
And I interrupted you. You were about to tell us a little bit about the Documents Roundtable as part of the ALA.
Yes, and they are one of the largest roundtables within ALA. They are also probably one of the most vocal, which sometimes has gotten us in trouble because roundtables cannot speak for the American Library Association, but we're very concerned about the issues, so we want our concerns known.
You talk about being concerned about the issues. So you've been involved with government documents for
my whole life.
Your whole life, even when you were pumping gas.
I think so.
Can you tell us if you have any thoughts about the changes from the time that you began with government documents to today in the means by which government information is delivered and how this impacts both today's libraries but also the needs of the citizens who rely on this government information?
When I first started, government documents were basically a print collection, and by print I also include microfiche. Many of them were not cataloged. Access to them was very limited. You had to use either a paper book index. Students today have no clue what that is. Actually, a lot of government documents librarians coming out into the profession don't even understand about the old book indexes. But if you're looking for something from the late 1800s, chances are, unless someone has cataloged it or digitized it, you're still going to have to go to the old print indexes to find a citation for it. To me, that's what I loved when I first got involved with government documents. It was like a little trivia contest to find an answer to a question. I remember one of my favorite GovDocs questions, and this was probably early on, was someone wanted to find a prayer that an astronaut had read while circling somewhere. I don't remember where they were circling at the time. We found it in a NASA publication. I mean, it was so cool. I mean, it took a while to find it, and something like, it was in the appendix of some volume. It was not something that we even found through an index. So, I mean, we found a publication about that flight, and I figured, okay, maybe it might be stuck in there somewhere, and sure enough it was. Nowadays, not only students, but librarians as well, just immediately go to Google or to an online system to find the answer, which sometimes that works, but there are still a huge amount of historical material that is not indexed in depth. You asked about changes. I mean, I've witnessed, it seems like, way more changes than I ever thought possible. The government then started doing more stuff on CD, and it's people need to understand that the government printing office doesn't necessarily make the decision about how something is printed. They just pass through the information that is given to them from the various agencies. GPO doesn't decide to print a publication. The agency or a congressional committee makes that decision, and they decide what format it is in. Obviously, as time's gone on and budgets have gotten shorter or smaller and smaller, agencies are putting, and even Congress are putting more and more of their materials of it up online. So the print collections are shrinking, which begs the question that gets asked all the time: do you still need a government documents librarian? And I have to admit, I am one of those ones who for the longest time said yes, yes, yes. And I'm starting to question that. There's less and less that you're actually getting in a physical format, which is great for our users. As more and more stuff is digitized, we have students finding government information very easily. They don't necessarily know that what they're looking at is a government publication. And I use the word publication loosely. I mean, it's not a print. It's an online version. But, it's hard to say. Does it matter whether a student knows if it's a government document? I don't know.
I guess I know that you continue to attend the Depository Library Council meeting. I know those continue to be vibrant meetings where lots of things are discussed, so I guess perhaps the real importance is in the information itself as opposed to what someone perceives its sources being. Yeah,
and I mean, we're still, the program itself, is designated by law. Some of the things that I did in my early involvements in the Government Documents Roundtable was trying to get the law changed. Worked with a congressman to get a draft bill out. It was introduced. I mean, it did die in committee, but and there were some at that time who said, no, you didn't need to change the law already covered what we were trying to do, but then you had other people who said, no, the law, you can't do this because of the way the law was written. So that's why we even attempted to get the law changed. There's still a hierarchical system within the depository program. You've got regionals, you've got selectives. The regional libraries, in theory, get everything. Selectives get to select. The regionals are running out of space. I mean, we've had many, many regionals drop out of the program, which there's a domino effect. If you're in a state and you're a selective and you don't have a regional, according to law, as a selective, you can't get rid of anything, which then puts pressure on the selective depository libraries.
So So still some very critical issues.
Yeah, and you know, I still worry about the historical collections. I mean, I worry as those of us die off or retire. You know, I worry now about whether we've got enough young librarians coming up through the profession who know how to find those historical materials.
Thank you, Susan Tulis, for allowing us to visit with you today and for taking these few moments to share so much about yourself and our profession. Before closing, however, is there anything you would like to add as we conclude this interview?
Yes, I do want to say that my years in AALL have been phenomenal. You couldn't meet a better group of people. I have so many friends that I've made through the profession. I mean, more so I think than even ALA, and I do have and ALA is such a huge group, but my focus was really government documents. And the Government Documents Roundtable is a phenomenal group of people. But I think I've made even more friends through AALL. And they're friends for life, and I'm so glad I had that opportunity. The other thing I do want to mention that is different, in fact, let me have a drink of water. The one thing that within ALA people always complained about having 8 o'clock meetings, but AALL is really tough because they have 7 a.m. meetings. So I always use that as don't complain.
Very good. Well, thank you so much. We
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.